What's going on, everybody? After 7 years of ownership and 43 videos on maintaining the FZ6, I'm here to bring you my honest review on the bike. Now in this video, I will not only be describing the experience of owning and riding the bike, but also addressing the question of if this is the right bike for you. On the whole, the FZ6 is a solid machine. Besides the throttle position sensor recall that was on the version 1 of the bike spanning 04 to 06, the FZ6 doesn't really have an Achilles heel per se. Yamaha used the 2003 R6 engine as the starting point when designing the engine in the FZ6, so they weren't starting from scratch. Although it shares many internal components with the R6 engine, the FZ6 engine was retuned for more usable mid-range power and torque. The main internal differences between the FZ6 and the 03 R6 engine was the head gasket, camshafts, ignition timing, and coil design, but more on the coil design later. But first things first, let's talk ergonomics and get on the bike. When riding the bike, you have a nice shape around the tank and frame to clamp your knees against to support the weight of your upper body as you lean slightly forward. If you suffer from wrist or back ailments, it's likely still not the bike for you as the geometry pitches you forward. Although not nearly as far down as a Supersport, basically a Supersport rider would say this is comfortable and relaxed, while a Harley rider would think this is aggressive and leaning forward. I like the riding position as it makes it easy to accelerate hard, but you don't spend your entire time holding yourself up by your arms and core like I see many people on sport bikes doing. Instead, you kind of have this neutral position where you're a little forward and your back might be strained a bit. That's why I don't recommend it if you got back problems. And your wrists do take some pressure, but you really got to focus on holding your weight up from the core of your body. But it's not so extreme like a Supersport where you're bent over meant to be just... The geometry of the bike, although not as twitchy as the R6, is still very lively. The bike easily turns into high-speed corners with just a light countersteer. Lean angle is easy to manage with a combination of throttle, brake, and steering. And the bike has a forgiving nature about it, whether in a parking lot or pinned on a back road. I'm 5'9", and I kind of wish the bike was an inch lower. I don't stand on my tiptoes when I come to a stop, but I certainly don't flat foot the ground. As for the sound of the bike, it's rather tame in factory configuration. Although it revs to 14,000, it doesn't have the zing that an R6 or a CBR 600RR has. It doesn't quite sound like a Supersport. This can be adjusted with some exhaust mods, but you're kind of limited in what you can do because there's primary catalytic converters built into the header of the bike, so unless you're going to go a full custom exhaust, it's pretty much impossible to go full catless. Although it is very easy to change out the mid-pipe cat, which is beneath the seat down here, which many people have done. Going catless also means you need to change the tune on the bike to ensure you get the proper air-fuel ratios and get the most out of your exhaust. Even though the FZ6 might sound tame, it's no slouch. With 98 horsepower at the engine, this bike has enough speed for intermediate or beginner riders alike. I personally wouldn't recommend the FZ6 as a first bike because I firmly believe that you should learn on 40 horsepower or less, basically a 400cc, so you don't get yourself into highway speed trouble. Over 100 mile per hour speeds are easily achievable on this bike, although it experiences a bit of instability around 140 miles per hour or just over about 210 kilometers an hour when the bike starts to get a little bit But what I love most about the power band on the FZ6 is how much you can change your speed within one gear. You could be doing 60 in third and roll onto the power and not have to shift till you pass 160. So the wide rev range and the gearing of the bike makes so that you can have a huge change of speed just in one gear. Makes it versatile, makes it easy to be fuel economical because you can really shift up and keep the revs low, and you can have a ton of fun in the high RPMs, all in one gear. While the power is great, the transmission and shifter are a little clunky. The transmission has worked flawlessly for me. Notably, the 1-2 shift is particularly bad for clunks, especially if it's a poorly timed shift, but it always goes into gear. Every other shift is great. 2-3, 3-4, 4-5, 5-6, all buttery smooth once you're past that 1-2 shift. Coming down the gears though, going 2-1, can be a bit tricky. If you're going faster than 40 kilometers an hour, the trans just won't let you into first, unless you rev match fairly accurately and then confidently click it down into first, then it'll go. But once you're going a certain speed, the bike doesn't like to go down into first from second. It gets a bit finicky. It's particularly bad if you clutch in for a while and the transmission slows down or stops spinning and then you try and go down into first. It's not going to happen. So clutch back out, clutch in, shift down, you'll make it happen. It's not very often that this is a problem, and the worst thing that happens is that you find neutral and that ain't so bad. One of my gripes about the bike is the suspension. This bike suffers from a strong case of parts bin engineering, which led to the cheap suspension components which aren't adjustable and offer very little support for spirited riding. The suspension gets the job done, but not elegantly. Over speed bumps and bumps in the road, the front end feels like it's crashing over the bumps without much control. The rear shock has preload adjustment to compensate for the weight of the rider, but no matter how you adjust it, the rear shock feels very linear. Meaning over large dips or big bumps in the road, the rear shock doesn't really ramp up as it compresses, it just stays one speed and it'll bottom out. I've bottomed it out a handful of times and it doesn't feel good. Öhlins makes a rear shock for the bike, and people have gone to great lengths to try and improve the front fork by changing oil weight, damper cartridges, spring rate, and material. All of which I kind of ask, is it worth it? I know it would improve the front end and you can add emulators and things like that to adjust the front end feel of the bike, but I think ultimately you're starting off with a very cheap design that is going to be challenging to improve on. Other people have taken R6 front ends and converted them to fit the FZ6, and I think if you're really invested, that's probably the best way to go, because in my experience, it's usually the best to start with the best factory OEM part, see if it can fit your bike, and then improve on that. On the theme of parts and engineering, the ignition system is nothing to write home about. I've done many videos detailing my woes with misfires, and the more I learned about the electrical side of the bike, the more I realized the batch fire system of 1 coil per 2 cylinders was a cost-cutting measure for Yamaha. The system works, it's simply prone to failure. Coils fail in mysterious ways, spark plug leads become frayed or poorly connected, copper plugs were used instead of iridium. This kept the cost of the bike down on showroom floors, but passed the cost on to the consumer with failing parts. Although this sounds pretty bad, the misfire problems I've had on the bike never prevented me from actually riding the bike wherever I wanted to. I was always able to ride the bike even with a misfire until I got the issue resolved. On top of that, parts for the ignition system are cheap, and I've done so many videos on the ignition system, you'll never have a problem because you got me here having gone through those problems before. I would be remiss to not mention how amazing of a touring bike the FZ6 is. Now, this isn't a BMW GS that you'll take to South America and back, but for weekend or week-long trips on twisty roads, this thing does a great job. I have the Shad top and side cases on my bike, and they're practically a permanent fixture at this point. I never take them off because they complement the bike's capabilities so well, and who doesn't love having storage on hand? I have a video on the Shad cases I'll link down below. One place Yamaha did not skimp out though is the brakes. The dual 4-piston 298mm disc brakes along with the dual piston rear brake do a great job of stopping you from any speed you may achieve on this bike. A moto journalist would say these brakes feel a bit soft and uncommunicative, but this isn't a race bike with steel braided lines or ceramic brake pads. High-end brake fluid or stainless steel brake lines can elevate the braking performance in such a way that would satisfy most moto journalists. I would say the brakes inspire confidence and match the level of engineering that went into the rest of the bike. The FZ6 comes equipped with relatively wide tires for the power level, which makes for a comfortable ride and a decent amount of grip when getting into the corners. It's also a popular tire size, so outfitting the FZ6 with your preferred tire brand and model should be no problem. One thing I think I take for granted on the FZ6 is the center stand. I use it all the time to the extent that owning a bike that doesn't have a center stand would have me scratching my head a bit. For maintenance or off-season parking, the center stand is wonderful. Maintenance costs and difficulty on the FZ6 are both rather low. With the tank lifted up, you have access to the entire top half of the motor. All hardware is based on the metric system, and honestly, the toolkit Yamaha provides you is well stocked with the essentials if caught in a bind. I've documented every service imaginable on this bike on my channel, and as a blanket statement, I'd say the bike is very accessible for someone who is new to wrenching. Lastly, if you're someone who will have a passenger regularly on the FZ6, it offers sufficient seat space and grips for the passenger to hold on to so the passenger doesn't have to be wrapped around you. If you're the kind of person that can't commit to a super sport because frankly, you're not going to be going to the track anytime soon and you're not a 19-year-old, then this bike is for you. If for someone that doesn't like the appeal of a Harley or a cruiser because you want to sit forward and you just have sporting tendencies, you like going fast around corners and you like a maneuverable bike, this one's for you. If either of those extremes really reach out to you and speak to you, like the cruising nature of being relaxed, doing a lot of Sunday driving, you don't go that fast through the corners, consider something else. If you really want to go to the track and you're going to do that at least once a year, pick up a super sport. I'm obviously a bit biased. I've loved this bike and had it for the last 7 years. Through thick and thin, it's been something I always come back to and never second guessing whether I should sell or not because I just enjoy the bike that much. If you pick up an FZ6 because of this review, I'd love to hear it down in the comments. Also, check out my channel for all the maintenance videos you could ever need on the FZ6 so that you're well supplied with knowledge and information on how to maintain your own FZ6. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. If this review helped you out, please smash the like and subscribe button down below. As always, have a good day.